We should know. Yeah, for sure.
I'm just
Common People versus James Crumbley, case number 222799989FH.
Thank you, Marquise, on behalf of the people.
Karen McDonald on behalf of the people. Good afternoon, Your Honor. Marielle Lehman on behalf of James Crumbley.
Who is the next witness?
Special Agent Brett Brandon, Judge.
All right, you ready for the jury?
May we approach briefly, Your Honor? Thank you. Microphone.
Why are you covering up your charitable organization shirt?
Do you want to be excluded from the courtroom? Do you want to be excluded from the courtroom?
No, not especially.
Okay. Are you ready for the jury?
People ready.
All rise for the jury.
You may be seated. Prosecutor, who's the next witness?
Special Agent Brandon.
Could you raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm the testimony about today is the truth to help you God? Okay, please step up and have a seat. And then state your name for the evidence and your first and last name.
It's Brett Brandon, B-R-E-T-T-B-R-A-N-D-O-N.
Go ahead, prosecutor.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
All right. Special Agent, can you tell the jury what role you're playing here today and during this trial?
I'm one of the officers in charge of this case.
Okay, and what does that mean?
It means that I've been assigned with Lieutenant Willis to usher this investigation through the prosecution.
Okay. This Lieutenant Willis?
Yes.
Okay. He's normally sitting right here. He's also an officer in charge?
Yes.
Okay. And can you tell the jury what your occupation is?
Yes, I'm a special agent with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. It's commonly referred to as just ATF.
And what does the ATF do?
The ATF enforces the nation's firearms, arson, and explosive laws. Obviously, we primarily focus on the firearms laws.
And so you're employed by the state or the federal government?
The federal government.
Okay. As part of that, well, I'm sorry, let me get to this. A little bit about your experience and background that brings you here to testify. How long have you been a special agent? How long have you been with the ATF?
It'll be 15 years in July.
Okay, and how long have you been a special agent?
Been a special agent it'll be approaching 11 years in July.
And what does special agent mean?
A special agent, so if it means we're a criminal investigator trained in investigating for the purposes of ATF, the crime underneath the jurisdiction of ATF, but also we assist with other federal investigations and obviously state and local investigations for ATF, primarily involving the use of firearms.
And what is your educational background?
I have a degree from Oakland University in political science. I spent 1 year at law school at the Catholic University of America, and then obviously I was trained at the ATF National Academy for the requisite training to become an ATF agent.
Is part of your role in the ATF based? You're based in Michigan, Michigan.
Yes.
Okay. Do you have any interaction with state investigations, and if so, what are they?
Yes, I've had many throughout my career. Right now I'm assigned to the Pontiac Gun Violence Task Force. It's a partnership between the Oakland County Sheriff's Office and the ATF. In that role, we investigate both state and federal firearms violations occurring within the city of Pontiac, primarily shootings.
And do you ever respond to or have anything to do with investigations that don't involve shootings?
Yes.
What kind of?
So generally, for whether it's the task force or just as an ATF agent, it's primarily the criminal possession and use of firearms.
So in other words, it doesn't have to be a shooting, it could just be a possession of
Sure,
firearms?
yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
About how many shooting investigations have you been a part of?
Hundreds at this point in my career.
And do you, as a part of in your role, have a general understanding of the laws associated with purchasing firearms, both in the state and federally, or just federally?
Both. Specific to this investigation, it would be both. Yes.
Okay. Can you tell the jury what FFL stands for?
Yes. So an FFL is a federal firearms licensee. I think we heard testimony obviously in here before from Kami Beck. She was the employee from the gun store in Oxford, as we're referring to it. That would be a federally licensed gun store, which is the technical term for that, is a federal firearms licensee.
And in order to become a licensee, what does that seller have to do or comply with?
So there's an application process that they have to go through with the ATF to become a federal firearms licensee.
And then are there guidelines or requirements they must follow?
Yes.
All right. We're going to get to that in a minute. Do you know James Crumbley?
I do.
And how did you come to know James Crumbley?
I became aware of who James Crumbley was the date of the shooting on November 30th, 2021, and I had contact with him inside of his residence during an execution of a search warrant that night.
Do you see him in the courtroom here today?
I do.
Can you describe something he's wearing?
He's wearing a white shirt, a blue tie, and headphones.
May the record reflect he's properly identified the defendant, Your Honor.
The record will reflect in-court identification of the defendant, James Crumbley.
Thank you. What, if anything, did you review in your role as officer in charge in this case?
A vast amount of information. So there would be the returns of 7 cell phones that were forensically extracted, social media returns, financial information, firearms records, including from the federal firearms licensee, and other documents and records, and surveillance video, obviously.
You were in the courtroom. Were you in the courtroom when Ed Wogrowski testified about forensic cell phone data?
Yes.
And can you tell the jury what software or program you used?
Yes.
Objection, Your Honor. The question is what Mr. Wogrowski used. I don't know that Agent Brandon knows that.
I corrected myself in that question purposely to say what you used. Are you aware of what was the investigation tool they used in cell phones?
What the ATF uses.
They both did. I'm trying to lay a foundation. Are you aware of? May I ask the question, Your Honor?
Go ahead.
Are you aware of that tool?
Yes, it was the same tool. So Detective Wogrowski used Cellbrite to put it in a readable format. When he spoke about a readable format, it's Cellbrite, and that's the format that I reviewed the forensic extractions in.
Okay, which is what I was trying to get at. You have experience do you have experience in this investigation reviewing the cell bite information, which is the cell phone data?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I want to draw your attention to November 30th of 2021 and ask you to first explain where you were when you heard about the shooting.
So I was in the ATF headquarters for the Detroit Field Division is in downtown Detroit. I was in an office that I shared at the time with my partner, and the assistant special agent in charge at the time came in. He knew I was from the Orient, Oxford area and let me know that there was a shooting at Oxford High School.
You currently are there, or you grew up there?
Both.
All right. What did you do?
I grabbed my bag and I ran out the door.
Did you go with anyone else? Was it discussed about what you were planning on doing? What the plan was? Who was going? Who wasn't going?
No, I just ran out the door and got to my car in the parking structure, turned on the lights and sirens, and then drove up I-75 in towards the direction of Oxford High School.
Do you typically work with a partner?
Yes,
Was he there that day?
he was.
Did you let him know you were going, or did he come with you?
At the beginning, at the time, no, I didn't let him know. He was stepped out for a minute, and I didn't even think about it. I was so focused on getting to the school.
Okay. About how long or does it take to get from Detroit to Oxford School?
It depends on traffic. It could be an hour. It could be more. It could be a little bit less, just depending on the time of day.
And did you have a familiarity with the area?
Yes.
Okay. What, if anything, did you know about that incident when you left?
All I knew when I left was that there was a shooting. As I drove northbound, I did receive information from our intelligence unit that there was a confirmed shooting. It was not a false alarm. Okay.
And what did you do as a result of that?
I continued to drive north on I-75, and at some point, I believe it was in Troy, met up with other law enforcement, forming like a caravan, like others have Detective Bobrowski testified to, traveling north on 75, and then getting to the exit at exit 81, where the old Palace of Auburn Hills used to be.
So the caravan, were there other people on the highway?
Yes.
This whole caravan, was it just law enforcement?
It was law enforcement. I believe at one point there was even a news truck trying to follow the caravan. I wasn't sure if they were aware, but I think they were just running parallel with the caravan.
And was it licensed sirens?
Yes.
Okay. What kind of rate of speed?
It was very fast, but it was as safe as we could be.
Okay. Can you tell the jury and describe what it was like driving up to Oxford School that day?
Your Honor, I'm going to object to the relevance.
Yeah, why is it relevant?
Because he's describing the scene and what he did and how he got into the school, and it was the scene of the shooting, and he was part of the investigation of the shooting.
Okay, so start there. So you arrive at the scene, you arrive at Oxford High School. Is that where you went first?
Yes.
Okay.
Can you describe the scene in terms of, was it easy to get there? Were there cars? Were there students?
So as we're getting to the school through obviously Lake Orion and Oxford, get to travel through there. All the cars were parked on the right side of the road, and so it was almost like the left lane. There were no cars in it, and people knew what was going on at that point. It had seemed that word had spread because no one was moving. It wasn't just like you normally would get over and then get back over in the left lane. People were just parked on the road. As I got in towards the school, I started noticing that there was a large group of people at the Meyer, and obviously learned later that was the reunification point. When I arrived at the school, there were a lot of law enforcement personnel. I can't even put a number on it. It was dozens, maybe 100 in the main vestibule area where like the front offices were located.
So when you arrived, were there more than one law enforcement agency? Was there more than one represented?
Yes, there were quite a few.
Okay. Did you know anything about where the alleged shooter was? Whether there were victims? What did you know when you approached the building?
At that point, I had a conversation with someone in our intelligence group that had confirmed related information that they had received that there were fatalities, there were injured victims.
Did you know whether or not the shooter was in custody?
No, I didn't. I assumed that I didn't hear any gunfire when I got to the school, so I assumed that either the shooter was in custody or it was a barricade. I wasn't sure what was going on, but I knew that it was not an active shooting scene.
Did you do anything before you entered the building? Were you carrying a weapon? Were you?
Yeah, so I put on my vest and then ran to the front of the school with other people from the parking lot that were approaching the school. As I got closer, the person at the door verified my identity as a law enforcement officer, and then at that time was informed that the shooter was in custody and that they were starting kind of to figure out who was going to be responsible for what inside of the school. As you can imagine, it was a very chaotic scene. And
Okay. You mentioned a vestibule when you earlier. What do you mean?
it was like the front area in front of like the front of a school where you'd have like offices where you check in if you were taking your kid out sick for the day. It was the main office area, and that's where I was directed to meet with Lieutenant Willis, who was identified as being the officer in charge of the scene.
Is there a difference between the phase of clearing a crime scene versus evidence collection?
Yes.
Can you tell the jury what the difference is and what comes first and what that is like?
Sure. So, at least the way ATF is trained, it would be an active shooter response would be to train and to find and eliminate the threat. After that has occurred, you have a clearing of the school, tactical clearing of the school to ensure there's no other bodies, secondary devices, or things of that nature. In this instance, it became clear that there were two things going on at once. There was people volunteering to clear the school for a second time, and then there was Lieutenant Willis, who was directing more of the investigative aspects of this case.
When you arrived, do you know about what time you arrived?
I don't recall exactly what time I arrived, no.
Okay. Were there still students in the school?
Not. If there were, if they were in classrooms, I wasn't aware of it. I did not see any students when I got to the school.
Was part of your role to engage in clearing the school?
So generally, yes, with ATF, we would be involved in clearing the school, the active shooter response, the clearing of the school, and then the investigation.
I mean, when you got there that day, did you help clear the school?
I did not. Based on the fact that the investigation had started, that the shooter was in custody and they had the weapon secured, I thought the best use of my abilities as an ATF agent would be to start the trace of the firearm to determine how it ended up there.
Okay. You just said you found Lieutenant Willis. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Where was he standing?
He was standing in front of the school offices. At one point, he was standing on a chair directing people around. Like I said, it was a very, very chaotic. But I found Lieutenant Willis, and I believe someone had told him I would be coming to help trace the firearm, and that's when I went over and located it.
And before that, had you ever met Lieutenant Willis?
No.
Okay. And what happened next?
So Lieutenant Willis held up a trash bin that had the murder weapon, several magazines, ammunition, and the shooter's cell phone inside, and I was able to take photographs of it.
Okay. A trash bin, a plastic trash bin.
Yes, so a trash, not a one you throw like a school lunch in, but like a small one you have in like an office, like a square or rectangle trash bin.
And if you know, what was it doing there, or how did it get there?
It was my understanding that evidence was placed in there to keep it safe while they were continuing to clear the school.
Okay. And you said he held it up, and then what happened?
I took photographs of the evidence, specifically the markings on the firearm that I needed to start the tracing process.
And when you say markings, what do you mean by markings?
So the firearms are required to have a make, model, and a serial number. Those three items are necessary to start the trace for ATF to determine where it was first sold.
Did you actually physically pick up the weapon?
I don't believe so. I don't think we wanted to preserve the evidence. I believe that the firearm was already flipped in a way that had the markings visible. I believe I just took a photograph of it and then provided that information to the intelligence group that would initiate the actual digital part of the trace.
Okay. Once you did that, what did you do next?
So once that process had been started, I went to Lieutenant Sam Marsban, who I had known from the Oakland County Sheriff's Office based on prior investigations, and in Pontiac, and asked what could be done, what needed to be done. And at that time, I began collecting facts for the timeline for a search warrant affidavit for the Crumbley's family residence.
Okay. Did you, well, we'll get to that. As part of your investigation, did you ever look at the surveillance video of the shooting?
Yes.
Okay. Before we get to that, did you, what are the steps and how long does it take to trace a firearm through the ATF?
So the timing of every trace is going to be different based on the records and how fast they're able to get to ATF. So it'll help you to understand the tracing process starts with those three things, right? The make, model, and serial number of the firearm. Once you have that information and you input it, you can trace it back to the first manufacturer, right? And when the manufacturer is then contacted by ATF, they can tell you which federally licensed gun store they sold it to, and then that gun store has to tell you who was the first person that purchased that firearm.
And did you learn who that was?
Yes, it was an individual in Rochester, Michigan, who had obtained the firearm from the gun store in Oxford.
And then was that person contacted?
Yes.
And were they contacted by you or someone on your team?
It was two ATF agents assigned to the same division I'm assigned to.
And what did they learn?
They learned that that individual had sold the firearm back to the Oxford gun store sometime in early September.
And then what did they do?
They went to the gun store and spoke to Ms. Cammie Back, who testified previously, and learned that the firearm was in fact, purchased by Mr. Crumbley on November 26, 2021.
So 4 days earlier?
Yes.
Okay. And if we can stop for a moment, did you just say September?
I meant November, I'm
okay,
sorry.
thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you to Mr. Case who pointed that out. November, correct?
November,
okay.
yes. And, yeah.
If we want to stop here for a moment, walk us through a general purchase of a firearm through a federally firearm licensee.
Sure. So if you walked into a gun store today to buy a firearm, you'd have to fill out what Ms. Back testified was called an ATF Form 4473. It would have information about yourself as well as information about the firearm you're purchasing. The FFL employee then would contact the National Instant Criminal Background Check System, the NICS system, through the FBI. And once they're given the okay to sell you the firearm, they proceed with that.
Do you know if that protocol and procedure was followed here?
Yes,
in this
it was.
case? All right. You just stated that in order to buy a firearm, you have to go through all those steps. Is that all guns? Do you have to go through this process?
So for every firearms sale from a federal firearms licensee, you do have to fill out the ATF 4473 and have those steps be fulfilled, yes.
Does that include all guns, long guns and pistols?
Yes.
Okay. And are there differences in long guns versus pistols?
Yes.
In terms of who can buy them and where?
Yes, in terms of age and things like that, there are different restrictions on the types of firearms you're purchasing.
Okay, and in general, how would you describe the restrictions on what is more restricted and less restricted?
Sure. So under federal law, if you're going to buy a firearm from a federal firearms licensee, you have to be 21 years of age to buy a handgun and 18 to buy a long gun. That would be either a rifle or a shotgun.
All right. And what about registering a weapon?
So there's no federal requirement for registration of a weapon. There is, however, obviously based on my experience in this case and others through the task force work, I'm aware obviously in Michigan that there are certain registration requirements for handguns.
And why the same requirements for long guns?
No.
And do you know why that is?
Objection, Your Honor, speculation.
Only if you know. Did you
I
say
have to
in
ask him
the-
first if he knows that's what I'm trying to do.
Did you say in the state, there isn't federally, but there's a state?
Correct.
Okay. State of Michigan.
Through your position in the ATF, do you know
I
why?
think that's my question.
Yes,
What-
I thought you
Is it
did.
state of
Right.
Michigan?
It is the state of Michigan, yes.
Thank you.
Do you know why there are more restrictions on handguns?
I believe it's due to concealability.
Okay. Under state law, who can register a weapon?
Under state law, register a handgun?
Yes. sorry.
Okay. So under state law, you can register a handgun at 18 years old But obviously you can't buy one until you're 21 from a federal firearms licensee, so you can, in one way, buy a private sale from someone that's 18 to someone that's over 18, and then register that firearm. So I have seen through previous experience that you could register a weapon at 18, a handgun, but you could not purchase that handgun from a federally licensed gun store, if that makes sense.
Okay. Were you made aware at some point if James Crumbley owned any other weapons other than the weapon he purchased on November 26th?
Yes.
Your Honor, I'm going to object to the reference of a weapon. I think it's a vague question. I think what Agent Brandon is aware of is alcohol, tobacco, firearms, and explosives. I think that the classification of a weapon is vague. If the prosecution is asking about firearms or handguns or pistols, then I think that should be the question and not specifically a weapon.
Well, his response can clarify that.
Correct, Your Honor.
Right? So go ahead.
You were made aware what other the reason I'm using weapon is because I don't want to specify because that'd be leading, so I'm trying to get him to explain it without asking a leading question. You were made aware what did he also own or purchase, if you know?
So in June of that year, he had also purchased a Cobra Classic Derringer and also a Keltec P17 .22 caliber pistol from that same gun store in Oxford.
So that was about 5 months earlier?
Yes.
Okay. Were both of those guns bought at the same time?
They were bought within several days of each other, but they were not bought at the same time.
And how did the gun store have any record of those sales?
Yes.
What was it?
So they had the 4473 documenting the sale of the Derringer, as well as a sales receipt and a Michigan pistol sales record documenting the sale to Mr. Crumbley for both the Derringer and the Keltec pistol.
Okay. So you've indicated now 3 separate handguns. Do I have that right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I am going to start asking you about each of these handguns and describe the difference in each. I'm putting on gloves because this is evidence, and I want to touch it with my gloves on. And the first handgun I'm going to ask you about is the handgun purchased on November 26th. Do you know what type of handgun it was?
Yes.
What was it?
It was a 6-hour SP 2022 with a specified serial number.
And so was it a 9mm?
Yes, it was.
Okay. All right. So before I do that, Special Agent Brandon, what is the way to handle a handgun safely before you even pick it up? I know there are firearm safety guidelines, but how do you make sure when you're handling a weapon for the first time that you're doing so in a safe way before?
Object to relevance, Your Honor.
Response?
I think the element of the crime that the defendant is charged with goes back to a legal duty in handling and storing a firearm, and so I absolutely think it's relevant.
Okay, do you mean picking it up or?
In every way.
Okay. I'm going to allow it.
Thank you. How do you safely pick up a handgun?
Sure. So based on the fact, so there is a zip tie in it, so everyone is aware that firearm has been made safe already, but for the purposes of this, so if you pick up the firearm, you want to keep it pointed in a safe direction, you want to keep your finger off the trigger, and you want to visually and physically inspect the chamber of the weapon and the magazine well of the weapon to make sure that it's not loaded.
Okay, so I'm going to pick up this. We know that is this the murder weapon?
Yes, it is.
All right. And we know that this has a zip tie in it.
Correct.
Okay.
Can you specify what exhibit number that is?
Yes, I'm sorry. 163. I think it's either admitted or there's no objection to it.
Correct.
Okay. This is the murder weapon. There's a zip tie in it. But even if there isn't, the general principle is to make sure the firearm is safe. You just said you physically examined the magazine well. Is that this right here?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And then you also have to do a second step, did you say?
Yeah, so the same thing. So I would say physically and visually inspect the chamber of the weapon. So down the barrel, if you look down the barrel right
So
there.
right
yeah.
here?
And to make sure there's not a round inserted into the chamber of the firearm.
Okay, and again, there's a zip tie in here, but in order to comply with that, you'd have to physically inspect to make sure there's no round in this chamber.
Correct.
And why, what's the reason for that?
So with firearm, there's four basic principles of firearm safety. I mentioned two of them. Number one is to treat every firearm like it's loaded. Number two is to point the firearm in a safe direction. Three would be keep your finger off the trigger, and then obviously not for report purposes, but if you're at a range or shooting, is to be mindful of your target and what's beyond it. At least that's the way ATF trains the four pillars of firearm safety. So the purpose would be to make sure that firearm's not loaded, that in case the trigger was accidentally or unintentionally discharged, that there's not an actual round in the chamber to be discharged.
Is it possible for a firearm to discharge without touching the actual trigger?
That would depend on a lot of different factors, including the type of firearm.
Okay.
I probably can't answer that question.
Okay, thank you. So you mentioned earlier that you have to identify certain markings. Where are, and I'm going to give you some gloves if you don't mind. We practice with the gloves, so it doesn't take this long, but it's still okay. If you wouldn't mind standing, if that's okay with the judge,
Okay.
I'm going to hand this handgun to you, safely pointed down, so you can show the jury what markings you're talking about to identify the weapon.
So as you can see right here, it's kind of hard to see with the light, but it says Sig Sauer. That would be the manufacturer. And then you have the serial number as well as the caliber generally also stamped on there as well.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to put this safely back into its box. And then do you know what these are?
Yes, those are the pistol magazines that come with the Sig Sauer SP 2022.
Okay. And just in case there are people on the jury that don't have a familiarity with handguns, what are these for? What's inside here usually?
So in a semi-automatic pistol, you would load your ammunition. Those magazines, I believe, can take up to 15 rounds. So you'd load the 9mm ammunition to capacity to 15 rounds and then insert that into the firearm. And then once you send the slide forward, that is what allows a round to be chambered into the firearm to be ready to be discharged.
So it has a 15-round capacity.
So it would have a 15-round magazine capacity. You can also fit one round in the chamber, so that firearm has a total capacity of 16 rounds.
Before you would have to reload.
Yes.
Okay. So can you explain to the jury what semi-automatic means?
So a semi-automatic firearm means that for every pull of the trigger, it only fires one projectile from the firearm, as opposed to a automatic firearm, which would be that if you pull the trigger one time, multiple rounds are dispelled from the firearm with one pull of the trigger.
The other two weapons you stated were a Derringer and a .22, correct?
It was a .22 caliber Derringer and a .22 caliber Cobra Classic, or a .22 caliber Kel-Tec pistol.
Okay, so Kel-Tec. All right. What is the difference between those two guns and a 9mm?
So a Kel-Tec, the Kel-Tec pistol is also a semi-automatic pistol. It's just chambered in .22 caliber as opposed to 9mm. It's a smaller round,
And again, you say round, and I think for lay people they think of that as many. But what do you mean when you say round?
So I know that there's been some talk in this trial about bullets. Bullets are the part of the piece of ammunition that comes out of the firearm when it's shot. The round of ammunition is what's inserted into the magazine before it's fired. That has the fired cartridge case, the bullet itself, and then some type of propellant or powder, usually smokeless powder.
Okay, so a bullet is what comes out of the shell casing and is expelled from the chamber, but a round includes the shell casing and the bullet and any kind of what was the last name?
Yes, it would be like the powder that's used yeah. So
Okay.
they would be the round of ammunition is the actual full piece of ammunition prior to being fired.
Okay. And does the 22 that James Crumbley owned, does it shoot or fire faster? Does it have a larger capacity magazine?
So I'm not an expert on ballistics and traveling of speed of firearms, but as far as capacity goes, it's got, I think the Kel-Tec P17 has a 17 round total capacity, but the actual round of ammunition itself, the 9mm versus the 22, the 9mm is going to be a wider round. So what the caliber refers to is the diameter of the bore, or the inside of the barrel. So it would mean that the 9mm round is bigger. And based on the size of the round, it's got more. It's going to be heavier, so the damage from that round would be more than a 22 caliber round. If that makes sense.
What kind of handgun does law enforcement usually carry?
9mm generally. At ATF we carry 9mm, and most of the departments and agencies I work with carry 9mm.
And do you know why?
Your Honor, I would object to relevance.
How is it all that?
It goes to the power and the use for a 9mm versus the weapon that the two handguns that James Crumbley already owned.
I guess I would have normally agreed with you, but we've heard testimony in this trial that the shooter was intent, even after the family owned two other guns, on having his father buy a 9mm. So I'm going to allow it.
Thank you. Can you tell the jury why law enforcement usually carries a 9mm, or you do with ATF?
Sure.
If you know.
Sure. So my understanding, based on the reasoning that ATF uses and other agencies, is that it's a powerful round that could be used to neutralize a threat. It's not going to over-penetrate, and the advancements in ballistics have made a 9mm the ideal round for law enforcement for using in defense.
And to put this into context, the hundreds of shooting investigations that you've conducted or have been a part of, are those done normally with a 22 or 9mm or something else? If you can say
Sure.
generally.
I don't think I can't recall working a shooting with more than one victim involving a 22 caliber firearm. I can recall several shootings that I've worked in the past with multiple victims involving a 9mm.
All right, thank you. I'm going to put this back in the evidence box and hand it to Lieutenant Willis, who is in charge of...
Your Honor, may we approach, please?
Okay, thank you, Judge. I appreciate that. All right, so, all right, I'm going to now introduce Exhibit 164. And okay, what is this?
That's the Cobra ENT Classic 2-shot 22 caliber Derringer purchased by Mr. Crumbley. I believe he paid for it on the 15th of June of 2021 and picked it up on the 16th of June 2021.
Okay, and this is pretty small.
Yes.
Okay, so what is this used for typically, if you know? And how many rounds can it?
It can hold 2 rounds. I mean, in today's.
If you would like to continue watching Day 3 of the trial for James Crumbley, the father of Oxford High School shooter Ethan Crumbley, you can head over to our website, wilx.com. You're going to see when you click here at the top on the blue bar, click on live stream. You're going to go click on news times first move and give it just a little bit, and you will see Day 3 of the trial for again James Crumbley, the father of Oxford High School shooter Ethan Crumbley, pop up on the screen. So again, head on over to wilx.com, go to live stream and click on news, and then when you click skip, the trial will continue. Until then, have a great rest of your day.